Okay, Ms. Hai, I thank you so much for your time today. I know we've been talking a lot about this, I'm still trying to get the word correct, stoichiometry? Stoichiometry, yes. You are certainly an expert in that content of science. And so I have taken the lesson and tried to give some suggestions on how to best satisfy the needs of the ESL student. I know our academic content in this lesson is chemistry, and your topic, as you said, was Dimensional Analysis of Stoichiometry.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good. I got the pronunciation correct. The learning target is an academic learning target, and the ESL student will understand the steps of stoichiometry. The ELD, the English language learner, it is standard 4 in the language of science, and let me show you how that works for an ESL student. The language of science, the English standards and the science standards, it's based upon the science in particular on the National Research Council, and all of the standards are written based on research and data. And basically the student, the ESL student, will be communicating information and ideas and concepts of science. So there's a maintaining of that rigor of your, in your case, chemistry, the science content, but with some language supports for that student. And then we have the speaking level, 3. The language domains are broken up into speaking, writing, reading, and they are, let me show you these if I can. These languages, the writing, reading, speaking, and listening, they're broken up into how a student will develop language. The testing of our student, I'll show you those in just a moment, and it will give us an indication on what he can do. In fact, I have this prepared for you from the WIDA, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But this is a can-do on what our student, based on the test, the assessments, what he can do currently in his language. The student, of course, is Yuto. He's a 15-year-old Japanese boy. He actually left Japan at age 7, and he's lived in 5 other countries with his family before coming to the U.S. So his native language was interrupted at age 7. Only one of those countries that he visited was English speaking. I believe it was the Philippines. And so he's been in other Asian cultures. He lives with his parents and his 2 younger sisters, and they are both school age. Both of his parents are educated, and they, his father works in the U.S. He is works in a plastics manufacturing company, so he does use some chemistry, or at least related to it as well. And his mother is at home, and she kind of maintains a traditional Japanese mother. In the Japanese culture, mothers are they are responsible for the educational needs of their students. So later on that'll come into play as I address some cultural things that may be helpful. Every Saturday, Yuto, he goes to the Japanese Learning School at Northern Kentucky University. He's maintaining that language development in Japanese. He also studies mathematics and social studies. Science is introduced in the Japanese school system in middle school and high school. And in those middle high school years, what a Japanese student will do in particular is to prepare for a test to get into college, which does include science. But unlike the American schools, there is not that science background in the formative years.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different. And he's studying to take that test to get into college. I think he's going to do that in the next couple of years.
Cool.
I know in his spare time, Yuto, he likes to skateboard and play the guitar and fly model helicopters, so that's kind of interesting. Now, when he was assessed, what happens is when enrollment papers for a student comes in, there's a place to check whether a student is speaking 2 languages at home, and of course his is. And so when that happens, it is referred to our co-op, and that co-op will provide that initial testing. And the initial testing does come from WITA. Let me explain to you what WITA is. WITA is the World-Class Instructional Design and Assessment. It's a consortium of state departments of education that pull together, and they use research and data, and they write assessments, design those assessments to try to gather language development and content demands. So they provide the testing. Kentucky is a member of WITA, so I think there's about 32 states that are a part of WITA, and our State Department is. The other organization is called TESOL, which is Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages. These standards are augmented from WITA, so they are provided, they provide that scale of whether a student is starting that language, whether they're emerging or developing, expanding, bridging, or even reaching. So let's go back to these scores that from that assessment that Yuto had. In his listening, he is at a 2.1. He scored a 299, and I know these numbers may not mean a lot to you, but they can be easily interpreted on this chart. He's tested in reading, speaking, and writing, and he has a 2.1, 2.5, 2.3, 2.6, and 2.8. So you can see that he's in that emerging level of language when it comes to English. I say that because the goals that we have today to help support your content that you're teaching, it will hopefully support that. Just for a minute, I'd like to ask you, how many years have you been teaching, Ms. High?
8 years.
8 years. And
yes,
what are your specialty areas?
Chemistry.
Chemistry. I know you, chemistry and biology.
Yes,
you have quite a background.
Yes, ma'am.
Chemistry
and biology. Yes, ma'am. And environmental science.
Okay. Have you ever had any ESL students in your class before?
No, ma'am. Never had one.
Okay. What about, do you have any training in ESL at all?
No, ma'am.
Okay. This is a great opportunity to give you some information that will help. Going back to our understanding of where we can best help. The scores give us an idea of what he can do. In fact, WITA has provided a can-do descriptor, which I'm going to give this to you as a resource,
okay.
Also along with some online resources from WITA. But these numbers basically tell us that he's in that beginning level, and possibly in some of the areas beginning to creep into level 3 or getting close to that. And so for today's goal, for this lesson's goal, this short unit, he'll be focusing on describing a process, the process of stoichiometry, and being able to retell that and use language to do that. So I'm going to give that to you and refer that to you in a little while.
Okay.
So let's start with the lesson and talk about where to begin. Your lesson is great. So many hands-on things, so many things to do. It's a 3-day, kind of a 3-day lesson. It's a 3-part stoichiometry lesson, and so we'll see how this unfolds to help. To activate prior knowledge for UTO, and that's so important because an ESL student needs to use their native language to get to the proficiency of the science language. So to activate that prior knowledge, I have this suggestion. There are these picture cards, and it is just 2 sheets. The directions are written in English and in Japanese so that he can finish those in class.
Okay.
And they are asking a question, and all the other students as well. What do you know about airbags? With a picture to support. What do you know about camels? With a picture to support and the Japanese instruction. And what do you know about astronauts as they are breathing out CO2 in a space shuttle?
Okay.
As the answers are written, our student, Yuto, would write his answer in Japanese. It's going to activate that prior knowledge that he has learned in his native language. Of course, the other students in your class would use their native languages, whether that be English or Spanish, and that's just a start. There are real-world connections to this topic of stoichiometry. After those are written, then the students will turn to their pair, a pair that has been predetermined, and they will talk about what they know. So they begin to make a connection. Using that pair is very important because it supports that learning. They hear their language. Yuto would make an attempt to talk about what he knows about these topics in English. Now, when he does that, there will be an expected. He will possibly grope for some of those. He knows some of the specialty science words according to his level of development, but he will have a little hard time, struggle for some of the science content words, which this is a perfect lesson to help bring that along for him in his language development. After the students have written that, of course, you being the expert on the chemistry, answering those questions, the airbags, they need an exact quantity of nitrogen gas, has to be produced in an instant for it to work. You know that. Now I know that. A camel's hump. In that question, you will provide that science. Camel's hump has the fat that's stored, and apparently I'm learning as well, along with everyone else, that it's a source of energy, but it's also a source of water because of what it produces, and I'm learning through the content a little bit about how that's working. And then the third example that you'll provide for the students, obviously, is that when, and this uses the language of the moles, the units of measure, that in a space shuttle, the CO2 that a crew will exhale is removed from the air from canisters of lithium and hydroxide. And on an average, I understand, not as an expert, but someone to help support Yuto in his learning, that an astronaut exhales about 20 moles of CO2 daily. So that's quite a bit, and your stoichiometry will show how that works. So it's setting him up for that purpose to learn. He's drawn in with his language. Then reviewing some of the relevant vocabulary. I know that Yuto has a science journal, as all your students do, And he's written the definitions of some of these words that I know in your lesson you're planning to assess them on briefly. And so allowing him that few minutes, maybe with a pair, to review some of the words like the Bohr's model, alkaline metals, alkali, halogens, noble gases, and all those, just those few vocabulary words. But what's so interesting is that almost in every language there's what we call a cognate. And a cognate is a word that sounds the same in English and another language. The word halogen that you've chosen as a vocabulary focus is one of those cognates in English and in Japanese. It is called harogen in Japanese, and I don't speak Japanese, I just make attempts here and there. And so halogen has that cognate, and one of the reasons why we focus on cognates is it helps to link those two languages together. So that's a very good word that he can, our ESL student can zone in on. So he's had a lot of opportunities already just in previewing some of the things to use the science words to try to develop some mastery, and then as he is assessed, you move through the lesson. We're still in day one, of course. Excellent. When you are beginning to talk about those different steps, I understand there are 3 steps of stoichiometry, and so I have for you a graphic organizer, because that will help as you move through that for the students, including Yuto, to take down some information, to take notes. So there's that language part, and then of course the mathematical, scientific part as well. So that will start, and he will use this throughout the lesson. It'll capture it, and graphic organizers are wonderful for ESL learners as well as other learners. Also, your use of a PowerPoint is really on point and will support Yuto's learning as well as your other students, of course. As you've described your lesson and as it goes through, at the conclusion of learning the steps of stoichiometry, they will say back to you. I thought that was absolutely wonderful, and actually research says that, saying aloud, that's part of that sensory support that he needs, or any ESL student needs, to say back those steps. So he's able to already meet some of the needs of our target, learning target, to describe the process. The graphic organizer will once again be very helpful. As you continue to move through, your lesson is wonderful with the scaffolding. You have great examples of scaffolding that learning from one of the steps to the second step to the third step. That is wonderful and really helps a lot. Now, another part that will support an ESL's learning is a home connection. So I have designed a homeschool activity for him to do. And hopefully you'll make good use of this. Yuto will be given the instructions to ask his mother what she knows about Japanese farming. He will be instructed in Japanese, I have that for you, to write down her comments and discuss that with his mother. And then he will begin to complete this activity at home. Now you see initially it has the pictures, but it's written in English. This is a tough thing for him to be able to share at home. So in using technology, which is also support, this entire piece was translated in Japanese. So all of this was translated. So this provides the English and the Japanese. So he's taking this home, he's talking to his mother about the importance of U.S. farming and what happens with fertilizers. And the content piece, or the question, is using the information There's a molecular formula here, and I am not an expert to say it enough, but basically how many bags of fertilizer would you purchase to satisfy this 340 acres. So it has all those pieces that are important for your stoichiometry. So he will take that home, he will discuss those, solve that problem, and bring it back. And so you have another connection, which is fantastic. So already these are supports. On that next day of learning, that third day, you had a terrific hands-on making sodium chloride, which is an activity that brings all of this chemistry to life. That is fantastic. And so I know that that really supports his learning, and it gives him an opportunity to use that science language as well. Thank you for providing me with that description of that. I appreciate that. Overall, all of the things that we look for to help, research says that English language learners, they have to use their native language to progress toward English, which is something we've already talked about. They're progressing simultaneously through both of those languages, so it's going to help him. The lessons are age appropriate, which certainly are, and the content really does maintain its rigor. That is so important because all of the standards are focused and driven by WITA. They maintain all of those. Use of technology throughout, which is wonderful. It's a real hands-on, biography-based, student-centered, and lots of supports. And you may not have realized, but you are already supporting his learning just in the nature of your teaching. The sensory supports, the hands-on, photos, scientific calculators, your postings of the periodic table, the graphic organizers, and illustrations of things like, what is a balanced equation? This was included in your lesson as well. And then that cooperative learning is an interactive support that puts him in those pairs, gives him an opportunity to use that scientific language. All the domains are eventually working themselves, or focusing on the speaking part, and this one in particular, and the home-to-school connection. So hopefully you can make good use of this. I want to say thank you so much, and I do have these available for you to use, and there's some online WITA information. So thank you so much, Ms. High. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. It's going to help me out a whole lot.
Thank you.